Thank you so much. I'll just start with a quick story. So last year, my company, Sparkbox, spent almost the entirety of 1 year consulting with a pretty large financial services company. And they're in a very competitive space. It's a very competitive company. And they have tons of ideas for many new products. And they really were struggling to move as quickly as they wanted to move. And so they hired us to help them build one of those new products and at the same time to help them build a more systematic design practice inside the organization. And their hope, I think, was that if we could be successful in those two endeavors, they would be able to then roll out additional products that were more consistent, and they would be able to do so in a more efficient way. So we jumped in alongside their team, and we got straight to work. And I will be very honest with you, this engagement for us was really difficult. It was a struggle. It was so difficult, in fact, that at the end of last year, we had to make the hard decision to walk away from this work. And the reason that we did so, the reason that we shared with this client of ours, was cultural incompatibility. And it's kind of hard to stand on a stage like this in front of you all and tell you about a time when I felt like we really failed. But that is the truth of this situation. And in 14 years of running Sparkbox, we've never had that happen before in this way. And so it really got me thinking. Honestly, I was trying to figure out how did we get to this situation, and really what I wanted to figure out is how do we keep that from happening again, right? So at the beginning of this year, coming back after the break over the end of the year, I decided I was going to jump into a rabbit hole of research around organizational culture. I felt I have to understand this better. And what I haven't told you about myself yet is that when I get interested in a topic, I go deep. In fact, I have a tendency to become maybe a little bit obsessed, and it's not healthy. And just to prove to you how unhealthy this is, I'm going to show you something that I've never shown in public before, which is one of my high school senior portraits. And this was this was during a time in my life when I really, truly believed that I should learn how to be a clown. And so I proceeded to practice and study juggling and yo-yoing and balloon animals and miming and magic and, yes, even unicycling. And that was the result of my senior portrait. And so back on track here, what I really want to tell you is about the rabbit hole of research around organizational culture that I dove into. So I'm going to share with you two frameworks today that I did not come up with, but frameworks that I discovered simply in reading old papers from organizational psychologists and social scientists who have been studying this thing for decades. Before I jump into all of that, I just want to invite you to connect with me. So again, my name is Ben. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you just want to talk, this is the favorite part of my job, is just getting a chance to interact with people who are also trying to solve these problems. So I would love the opportunity to do that with you. Email, Twitter. I even made a beautiful little form that you can fill out if you have feedback on my presentation or ideas, or if your experience is just different than what I share today. So please take a moment to do that. It would mean a lot to me. So the first framework I want to share with you was developed by a gentleman named Edgar Sheen. He's a social scientist in the US, and it offers a very simple model which we can use to talk about organizational culture. And he said that culture is made up of 3 layers. The first is our basic underlying assumptions. The second is our espoused beliefs. And the third is the artifacts of the culture. So artifacts are the things that you see, the visible perks, maybe the benefits, the foosball table, right? The free lunch that your company provides for you. And when you think about culture, these are often the things that you think about. They're very tangible, so they come to mind first. When we say espoused beliefs, what we're talking about are the things that people say. So if you talk to your coworkers and you ask them about the culture, what are the things that they say? If you hear your CEO stand in front of your organization and say, our mission is this, right? That is what you say about your culture. Perhaps you've got, when you first walk in, you've got a big, logo, you've got a tagline that's mounted on the wall, right? These are the things that we say. And finally, the basic underlying assumptions are what people actually believe. And these are much harder to determine, right? These are usually only revealed by the actions that somebody takes in the face of very difficult decisions. So it takes a lot of time for you to determine what are the actual basic underlying assumptions. Now, as an employee, as somebody who's working inside of an organization, you experience these things from the top down. If you can imagine your first day at work, you come in, you see what you see, you get your free lunch, you play a little foosball, and then maybe over time you have some conversations, you get to know people, and you hear what they say, and then maybe in difficult times you get to see how the leadership inside your organization makes decisions. And so you experience these things from the top down. And when these things don't line up, right, when there's a difference in what people believe and what people say and what you see, we call that a weak culture. And weak cultures tend to have an excessive number of processes, a lot of policies and procedures and rules, right, in order to police the behavior of individuals. Now, when all three of these layers align, we call it a strong culture. And this means that you don't have to be as explicit in stating the behaviors that you expect, because the people involved want the same things, right? They believe the same things. They have a shared set of values. Now, this helps tremendously in building an organization where people trust each other and where people feel like they belong. Now, I wanted to share this with you only because I think it's hard to define culture. If I had just said, what do you think culture is, we would have had thousands of different answers, right? And so this gives us a nice set of language that we can use to talk about culture. So the second framework I want to share with you was developed by Kim Cameron and Robert Quinn in 1999, and it's called the Competing Values Framework. And in this framework, they state that there are 4 primary types of organizational culture. And they called it the Competing Values Framework because there's an X and a Y axis, and on both axes they map 2 competing values. So let's talk quickly about each of these. On the Y axis, they talk about flexibility versus focus. Flexible meaning a culture that's very dynamic and adaptive. These cultures are willing to change when things need to change. And focused meaning stable and ordered. These are cultures that have a lot of confidence in the things they believe, and they want to stay true to those founding ideals. So now along the x-axis, they span from an internal orientation to an external orientation. Internal meaning they make their decisions based on factors that originate inside of their culture. And external meaning they make decisions based on things happening around them, so their competition or the market or things like this, the industry. Now, I just want to say that most organizations are going to have some of each of these characteristics. When you study this, they make these beautiful little diagrams that show you what percentage of each you have. But for the sake of today, we're going to think about most organizations do have one that sort of stands out as their primary type of culture. So that's kind of how we'll think about it for today's conversation. So let's take a quick look at each of these quadrants. The top left joins flexibility with an internal orientation, and this is a collaborative or clan culture. This has an eye toward long-term development, cohesion, morale, mutual support. And these organizations are thinking, how do we do things together? So this is often where you would find a service company, and this is where my company, Sparkbox, lives, because this is where I personally want us to be. The bottom left joins focus with an internal orientation, and this is a control or hierarchy culture where progress is really incremental, there's respect for hierarchy, and value is placed on stability, on predictability, and doing things right. Now, this is often where you might find banking or healthcare type organizations. And I just want to pause because when I say the words collaboration and control, you're going to have a bunch of things happening in your brain, right? You probably are mostly going to say collaboration is good and control is bad. And what I want you to hear is that none of these are good, none of these are bad, okay? There are healthy versions of every one of these, and there are unhealthy versions of each. So what's important is we use these words because we have to use some words to describe them, but try to think only about the definitions, not the connotations, not the things that, the emotion that comes with them, okay? So control, not necessarily bad, just different, right? The top right, this is where we join flexibility with an external orientation, and this is a creative or adhocracy culture. I had to look up what adhocracy means. It's literally just the opposite of bureaucracy, so anything goes, basically. These are cultures where new ideas can really break through. There's a lot of flexibility, there's creativity, there's disruption, there's entrepreneurship, and these are the things that we reward. And there's a lot of value placed on doing things first. So this is where your startup or your scale-up tends to live, right? And then finally, in that bottom right quadrant, we have a joining of focus with external orientation. And this is a competitive or market culture. And here we have an eye towards short-term performance, right? Acquisition, so buying other companies, is a major strategy for growth. And individuals here are rewarded for doing things fast. So these are the companies literally that are out there looking at their competition and thinking, how can we just consume them so we don't have to deal with them anymore? Now, I'm going to add 4 additional sentiments. These are ones that I've just made up from my digging around. So in the top left, under collaborative, I'm adding this phrase, people first. And when you talk with organizations that are collaborative, they say this a lot. They talk a lot about the people on their teams. In the bottom left, controlling, I've added this phrase, avoid risk. Because when you talk to these companies, they're often saying, we have to be risk averse. We have to find ways around the risk, you know. In the top right, I've added disrupt everything. Because when you talk to these organizations, that's really what their focus is. They're trying to break the norm. And in the bottom right, I've added beat the competition. Because these organizations are so focused on what's happening with their competitors. So I want to ask you 2 questions now that we have sort of a basic understanding here. I want you to imagine that the CEO or the owner or the president of your company is standing right here, and I turn to this person and I ask them, what is the culture of these 4? What is the culture of your organization? So take a moment and think about what your CEO or your president would tell me, and then we're going to just do a quick show of hands. I'm curious. Okay, so the president of your company is right here, and I ask, which of these is your company's culture? So who would say collaboration? That's what your CEO would say. Good? Okay, how many of you believe your CEO would say control? Risk averse, that's what's important to us, okay? How many of you think your CEO would say, we disrupt, we're creative, we do things first? Okay, all right, good. And how many would say competitive? So we do things fast, we want to beat our competition. Interesting. We've got a pretty good mix, actually, that's great. That's kind of what I have noticed when I've spoken with groups about this. So now one additional thing to share with you before I ask my second question. Culture is formed any place where a consistent group of people interact regularly. So this could be a product team, right, inside your company, but it could also be the group of people who get together over lunch and knit, right? And so these little subcultures are formed all over the place. So your organization has a culture, but there are also probably hundreds of subcultures that exist inside of that company. And this is where things start to get really interesting. So now I want you to imagine that your CEO is left, they can't hear anything you say, and now I'm just asking you, if you have a design system or a systematic approach to doing interface work inside your organization. I want you to think about the culture of that organization, the subculture of your design system program. So take a moment to think a little bit about that, and I'll take another sip of water. Okay, so same question, but now we're thinking about the subculture, only that smaller group. So how many of you would say that the subculture of your design system program is collaborative? Let me see the hands. Okay. And how many of you would say that that subculture is controlling? Okay, interesting. Now, how many of you would say that the subculture is disruption, do things first? Okay, a couple. And how many of you would say that subculture is competitive? We want to beat the competition with our design system. Anybody? Right. Okay, so this is kind of what I have observed, right? Which is that organizational culture can be many of these, but oftentimes when I speak with design system teams, their cultures tend to fall on the left side of this diagram. And that's because design system programs are internally focused most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. So I have been interviewing people for about 5 years around design systems because we do this design system survey every year. And as part of that work, I want to make sure it's staying relevant. So each year, before we get the survey ready, I talk to as many people as I can, and I just try to get a pulse on what's happening. So as I started to do this research into organizational culture, I dug in a bit and looked back through all 5 years of my notes. And I only found one interview that I think was not on this left side of the diagram with that team. So I'm not saying this is perfect, but what I have experienced is that most design systems tend to either be collaborative or controlling. And please remember, these are not negative or positive words, all right? So the first type of common design system culture falls into that top left quadrant. So we know they value doing things together. They are also focused on the long-term success of the system and the company. And I hear them say things like this. They say, I believe the scope of my work cannot be accomplished in any way other than to partner with the teams who have caught this vision. And that becomes kind of the driver for them. And this cross-team collaboration often means the systems they build are enabling instead of restrictive, right? The other primary type of culture is found in that lower left quadrant, so we know they value doing things right. They are focused on incremental improvements over time, and these cultures are often driven by inconsistency in their products. And I hear them say things like this: my subscribers haven't created consistency, so I'm here to make sure they do going forward. Now, neither of these, again, is right or wrong, but there are healthy and unhealthy versions of each. So let's spend a few minutes thinking about the healthy characteristics of each of these design system subcultures. So a healthy characteristic of a collaborative culture handles prioritization primarily based on the subscriber needs. And in the controlling subculture, it's focused more on the organization's needs. And really, this makes sense, right? If my perspective is collaboration, I do the work to go engage with my subscribers, and I understand their needs. In the controlling model, typically it's more like this company needs to move in a certain direction. We see the system as a way to get there. And so we're thinking about those bigger picture organizational needs. And again, these are not mutually exclusive, but this is sort of the primary driver for this concern. On the healthy side for collaboration, we also see adoption is oftentimes driven by relationships. So it's going and meeting these people. It's getting to know what they need. It's helping them become a subscriber. And in the controlling model, it's oftentimes primarily driven by incentives. So how do we put the things in place that will create the desire for these folks to do what we need them to do? A third one here under healthy for collaboration is there's intentional flexibility built into the system. So in other words, extending the system, extending components and patterns is encouraged oftentimes, and many times they build that into the system as there's an approach or a process for doing so. And in those controlling cultures, it's necessarily restrictive. So that the way that people think about it is they say, use what we have if you can, right? Start there, please. And that's kind of the general attitude they take. And then the fourth here under healthy for collaboration is the system adapts to the needs of the subscribers versus in controlling, the subscribers adapt to the approach of the system. So this is, who do we expect to change, right? When you build a system, you're asking, everything has to change. So do you take the work as your systems team to understand what the subscribers need and try to meet them where they are? Or do you ask them to change their approach to fit into what your system will offer? So these are the healthy characteristics. So let's talk a little bit about the unhealthy characteristics. So the first under collaboration is it tries to serve everyone perfectly, and in doing so, serves nobody well, right? And under controlling, because there's a lack of interest in gathering input from subscribers, it serves nobody well. Another unhealthy for collaboration is they can become very overwhelmed with input, right? And so that results in just really slow execution. There's too much input for them to process. And on the controlling side, they disregard input. And this results in oftentimes a need to rework things. If you've seen, or if maybe your organization is on their third or fourth attempt at a design system, a lot of times this is kind of what's going on. In an unhealthy collaborative culture, extension can be really abused, right? So your product teams may take this thing and just try to do wild stuff with it. They're not following the guidelines you've provided. And in the controlling culture, it's simply prohibited, right? Everything you need is here, only use this. And our last unhealthy characteristic in the collaborative is hand-holding support for adoption. In other words, they're almost like they're doing too much work for you, right? And in the controlling, there's no support. It's just go to the doc site, figure it out. So again, healthy, unhealthy, right? So there are ways that this can work well in both of these, and there are ways that it can be unhealthy and sometimes even toxic. So that gives us kind of an overview of the kinds of organizational cultures that we can expect to see. What's really interesting about this, and this is kind of what I really wanted to dig into, is understanding how these cultures interact. And so the way that this works, and this is not my assessment, this is still from the literature these social scientists and organizational psychologists have developed, is they talk about diagonal cultures being incompatible. So if your organization has a creative, entrepreneurial, do things first kind of culture, that means it's going to be really hard for you to succeed as a controlling, do things right design system culture. If you think about this, the creative quadrant is about disruption, and that control quadrant is about staying true to what you know. So those two ideas just simply don't work together. And I was doing an interview with a woman who leads the design system at a very large online job market website, and she told me this story, which I thought was beautiful. She said that when she began there, the company was in startup mode, so they were in that top right quadrant, okay? And the market they were in was very competitive, so they had made a plan to try and figure things out. How are they gonna win? However, their product interfaces were very inconsistent. And so they felt that a design system was a solution for them that would address the inconsistencies and get them under control. And so the system they built was intentionally limiting. They wanted to force those product teams to use the same components and felt that those teams would be able to do everything they needed with a small set of components and no ability to extend them. Well, it turns out that the startup mindset, that creative culture, was actually what was driving the inconsistency in the product, because the product was pivoting constantly, right? The leadership was trying to find their place in the market. And so those changes, rapid changes, were creating that inconsistency. And when they offered a design system to the product teams that was limiting and controlling, those teams simply built what they needed outside of the context of the system, right? So here's what she said at the end of our interview. She said, "We should have recognized the need for flexibility in the system as a way of supporting the necessary pivots the company was taking to find our place in the market. That would have built trust with our subscribers, and that would have been an enabling tool instead of a restrictive one." And what she was describing to me without actually knowing it is that she felt they should have been operating with more intentionality in their culture, right? They should have been operating on the top of this chart. And the opposite diagonal is also incompatible. So if your company is in this more competitive, do things fast kind of culture, it's going to be really hard for your design system program to succeed if you're trying to do so as a collaborative, do things together kind of culture. In fact, if you recall that story I told you at the very beginning of this presentation, I now actually believe this was a part of the problem for us and what we were trying to do. Our client was clearly in this competitive quadrant. And I've built my company's culture to sort of mimic my own values, which is collaboration. And so we were trying to operate against the current of their culture. And my takeaway from this is that we've got to recognize when we're working with I have to recognize when we're working with a more competitive culture, and I have to make adjustments to how we work in order to better align with the things they need. And these two cultures are compatible. And when you realize this, you can start to shape the culture of your design system program to fit into the culture of your organization. And this is going to feel like you're swimming with the current instead of against it. So the big takeaway here is for you to look up from the work, to look around, to understand that these forces are actually at play. And you can try to fight against this, but it's really hard. It's very exhausting, and oftentimes it just doesn't work. So understand the cultures and the subcultures inside your organization and be intentional about forming your own culture in a way that gives it a chance at success. Now, I always get this question whenever I talk about culture. Can the design system subculture change the culture of the organization? Believe me, I want this to be the case. And I have seen some really healthy design system subcultures make an impact on sort of the next tier out, right? So if they're living inside of a design or a product team, I've seen the design system subculture make a really good impact on those overall design culture. But it's really hard and it's really slow work to make this kind of shift at an organizational level. And that comes back to this diagram. You'll recall that as an employee, as somebody who works inside of a company, you experience this from the top down. But culture is created from the bottom up. You do this by identifying the underlying assumptions that are shared by each individual. And these become your common values. And when you can find unity in each person's basic underlying assumptions, the other two layers become a natural outpouring of those beliefs. With this cultural alignment, the things we say and the things we see are simply a reflection of the things we believe. And I want to close with just one simple idea. Your design system will not make your products more consistent. Think about this, right? If I gave every one of you a different design system and asked you to, you could build the most wildly inconsistent things with it, right? And that's, well, I would also say if you're supporting a design system right now, if you work on one, you probably are seeing this maybe even from your product teams, right? The really hard truth here is that people will make what they want to make. And the real critical word is this word, want. So if consistency is your goal, the only sustainable way to get to that is to change what your subscribers want to do. You do that with culture, not with pixels, not with code, not with documentation, not with Figma, not with React. And your design system can be a catalyst for this kind of change, but it will not do it on its own. That is the unspoken and the deeply challenging mandate of a design system team. That is your job. And I hope some of these ideas will help you to do this job a little bit better tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah.
Well done. So please join me for a little conversation. We have some questions to discuss, topics to cover. There are that last slide. People took photos of that and screenshots of that as well. That's fantastic. So one question that came up, it was actually quite interesting. Got me to thinking as well. Is there a way for a design system with a collaborative culture to blend in a healthy way with an organization that is a control culture?
Is it possible? I think it's probably possible. I think it's all of this work is a recognition that in the world of a design system, you think about it like this: you're interacting with so many teams. So every one of those teams you interact with has its own subculture. So it's not, I tried to make it simple so we could talk about it here in a short period of time, but there is so much more to this. Like every product team has its own subculture. Every group of developers, even inside that product team, is going to have its own subculture. So what this means is you have to understand these people. You have to understand the things that are important to them. And what I'm suggesting is, again, not that control or collaboration is right or wrong. It's only that you have to recognize these forces are at play. So if you want to be successful, you have to adjust. You have to fit in. So it's difficult, but it's necessary.
Okay. Another question that also came up, of course, is just how are you working on a design systems project? How do you start? So you have to be very careful in identifying where are some of those red flags, basically, where you should be saying, okay, maybe we should be a bit more careful and go in this direction. Maybe before we even start that design system project, we need to have a conversation about culture. Or do you usually have a conversation about culture before you even start?
Usually we just start by asking a lot of questions. I just want to get to know people. I want to understand what's working, what's not, what are they struggling with. And those are the kinds of questions that help you to figure out the culture. So I don't typically frame it like this. It's just a lot of conversations, and that helps me to understand, helps our team to understand where are they operating, And from that, then we can start to have conversations with them and say, hey, it feels a little bit like you're operating kind of in this quadrant. Does that make sense to you? Do you feel that? And they'll say yes or no, and they'll challenge it or they'll agree.
Right.
And then we can share some of this and say, that means we should probably take this approach.
Right. But I think that most companies, when they're in the position when they think that they need a design system, I guess that very often you will be in a position where companies feel like they need it for consistency, to speed up the process, so they can reuse components and also improve the design speed and release speed and all of those things. And then you come in and you have conversations about culture, right? I think, is it very often like a very strategic approach where you have to really educate clients about this is how it is going to be, what it's going to require, before you even jump in the components? And also, at which point do you then jump into these conversations about naming components, grouping components, and all that? What's the timeline?
Yeah, I mean...
Not the timeline, but like I would say the path.
So here's an example, like a more practical example. When you think about, many of the organizations we work with are struggling to figure out how to get their subscriber teams to contribute back. So they want a contribution model. They want a process for this, right? So if I was thinking about that culturally, what I would say is, if you don't demonstrate collaboration early in the life of your design system, it will be really difficult for you to put a collaborative process like contribution in practice later. So what I would say culturally is we have to model what we expect. Right. So in early stages, before you're thinking about contribution, when you're just trying to figure out what should our what should our first version look like? That's where you can start to model a more collaborative approach, and that's where you're sitting down and actually engaging with those subscribers to show them, hey, this is not me doing it on my own, right? This is us figuring this out together.
Right.
And then you're setting the tone, you're establishing the culture, so later on, when you go back to them and say, hey, we actually need your help again. This is not a new thing. This is what it has been all along. Right? We're modeling the culture we want.
But then also, when you look at all the quadrants, it's not like some of them are wrong and some of them are right.
Yeah.
So potentially, you could go into any organization in any of those quadrants and whatever the crossings they have, and you would be able to build up a design system that would work for them. But it just requires you to find your way, maneuver your way around the culture that they have.
I mean, I think understanding these forces gives you a better shot at being successful, you know? Yeah. And I don't know quite how to express this except to say that, like, a lot of the positive, or the I think I said healthy and unhealthy characteristics, like, these things are blurry, right? It's not, I was describing to you two opposite ends of a spectrum, right? So there's a lot of nuance in between, and you can still have collaborative processes even inside a culture that has a little bit more control. You know, that's necessary in a lot of ways. So,
just one new question that came up now in Google Doc. Thank you so much for participating in there as well. How do you use your values to assess if you even can work with the culture during a sales process or as you prospect for adoption? How and when do you decline to engage?
This is so good. I love this question. And it reminds me a little bit of the closing talk from Dina last night, because I love what she shared. She said that she only wanted to do work that she really loved. And that, oh man, that just, like, I got chills when I heard somebody tell a story about sticking to just a commitment to doing something that she truly loves to do. And you've seen how that's working for her. It's beautiful. I think the way that I address this question, so using our values to determine who we want to work with and who we don't, the way we try to do this is we just try to be really vocal about the things we believe. And what that does is it sort of creates two extreme audiences, right? If I am always talking to you about the things I believe, and you also believe those things, we're going to have a connection, right? And we're going to want to work together. And if I'm always talking about the things I believe, and you just straight up disagree with me, then you're just not going to come talk to me. And so a lot of this is sort of a pre-qualification. So we don't have a lot of folks who reach out to us who aren't interested in working in the way that we want to work. Yeah. But it is our job early on to try and assess that, and occasionally those folks get through the process.
Right. It's also interesting, like, looking at that, maybe just one more question on that. Because you also ran the survey just recently about design systems and people who are running design systems, who are maintaining design systems. What would you say? Maybe you could share some of the key insights that surprised you in that survey. Yeah. Just what is the state of design systems in organizations? So what are the state of things, or what are the main problems that they're struggling? I mean, or is it because it's probably going to be the same? It is often. It's been the same for a long time, and I think it's things like, well, actually Nathan said this the other day, just like measuring stuff, you know, like it's just not simple. And I feel like even if there's something like adoption, the way that you describe tracking it, having some things where you could sort of automate checking to see what's available, what's not, what's being used, what's not. I feel like even that is such a small slice of actually tracking adoption, because a design system should be serving so many more disciplines than just the people using Figma and the people writing React code. You know, there's QA folks, there's your product ownership, there's just UX research, there's content, there's all these other roles. And I don't like the idea of saying adoption only means it's in production, right? There's a whole process that we've gone through, and if the design system is serving every discipline well, it will lift and increase the speed and the consistency of all of those roles, all of that stuff. And so how do we measure adoption in UX research, right? I mean, I think people are struggling with this. They're trying to figure this out, and it's difficult because we're talking about measuring across many tools, across many processes, across many disciplines, and that's just not simple, you know? So I think measuring is hard. I think there was one other insight from the survey that really stood out to me. We asked
two questions. One was, what are the challenges you're facing, and the other was, what are you most focused on? And we gave them just a list, the same list of challenges and things they could be focused on. And my team kind of put this in the survey, and I remember reading it and thinking, aren't people just going to answer the same thing for both of these questions, you know? And what I learned is they don't. And the reason why is because the things they're struggling with, they don't have authority sometimes to make change. And so, I mean, I think what that means to me is organizationally, we've got to think about the things we're asking of these teams. And actually, if we want them to be successful, we have to give them the authority to make those kind of changes. And that's hard. I think that's hard to do, but that's probably what's necessary.
So somebody has been highlighting, bolding, italicizing, and then highlighting again, and then reformatting one sentence, which I have to read out, which is, we face the same issues in data, which we call data governance. Okay, that's not. It wasn't supposed to be like a personal attack on you, Keith. That's okay. That's okay. We like bold. Anybody? I have no problem with bold. Like italic is nice too. That's all fine. It all works. That's all cool. Final thing on that, maybe. I heard rumors, Ben. You might be working on a book.
I'm trying. Yeah.
Can you share maybe a few more details about, I don't know, the publisher?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I've got 3 big concepts that I want to put in there. One of them is about culture, because I think we're just not talking enough about this stuff. So Vitaly has agreed.
Oh, did I? Oh, I think we did. Okay. Yes, excellent. Now it's official.
Now it's official.
Ari is over there, like thinking, interesting.
Yes.
Okay. I'm very much looking forward to this, to be honest. So this is going to be great. Maybe the final one is if there was one problem that you'd like design systems to be solved in the design systems space, like for good.
Gosh.
Would it be culture? Would it be collaboration? Would it be naming things?
That would be so nice. I don't know. I mean, one problem. There's so many.
I have all the time in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's finding ways to sort of help all of these various disciplines actually feel like they're on the same team. You know, I think I see glimpses of that, and that's one of the reasons I love design system work, is because it sort of gives us this sort of like, it's like the thing we're all doing together. Yeah. And I don't know what it is. It's like the structure of companies, I think, that has created this illusion that we're on different teams, when really we're not. You know, we're trying to serve our customers. So a design system kind of forces these groups onto the same team, which I love that. And I think it has a lot of power to create a real feeling of unity inside of a company. So that's what I look for. I would love to figure out a way to do that consistently.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Ben.
My pleasure. Thank you all so much.